Hi, welcome to our man cave. This is Sparky, my co-producer, and he has graciously consented for us to use his room today to talk about Caroline Shaw's new CD of The Listeners, which we produced last October with Philharmonia Baroque Orchestra. I thought I knew this piece pretty well. I had talked to Caroline about writing it. I rehearsed the chorale. I attended all of the orchestra rehearsals. I went to all 4 performances. And yet, when I started listening to the new CD, which you can order from philharmonia.org right now, the work really changed in the context of the time just 6 months after we premiered it in October. You know, music historians spend a lot of time looking at the context in which a piece is written, the political circumstances, the life of the composer, and all. But we don't look at necessarily changes that take place in the lives of the audience. So if we think back to October for a minute, and we think of when this piece premiered, there was a great hubris about outer space. Elon Musk was preparing SpaceX to send people he hoped one day would colonize Mars. The government formed a space force. There was great hubris here on Earth about what we could offer space. Well, space caught up with us, and now I'm sequestered in my own home. A virus, which was not from outer space, has sort of put all of those plans to rest. And therefore, when we listen to this piece, the audience that heard it in October is not the audience that is going to hear it now. Even if you heard those performances in October, I think, like me, you will find that the piece has brand new things to say. Now, don't worry if you haven't gotten the CD and you haven't run off to your computer to buy it quite yet. I'm going to play some examples that may whet your appetite and help you really want to get this into your CD library. A little background, Philharmonia had commissioned Caroline to write a song cycle for Anne-Sophie von Otter, which also appears on this CD. It's called Is a Rose. It's a cycle of 3 songs. But today we're going to talk about the oratorio, The Listeners. The Listeners, she calls an oratorio and finds that the Handel oratorio was kind of a model for her. Oratorio being an extended work with soloists, with orchestra, with chorus, and some kind of overarching theme or libretto. Normally, that's done by a single librettist, as it was for Handel, for instance. But in this case, Caroline has taken an anthology of poetry from the 17th century, that is the Baroque era, to the 21st century. And in the process of putting those together, we see some universal themes that I think are very much worth our thoughts today. Caroline knew that she was writing for a period instrument orchestra. Philharmonia musicians play instruments that largely have gone unchanged since the 18th century. Violins playing on gut strings with Baroque bows, valveless natural trumpets and horns, single-keyed flutes, oboes, bassoons. In other words, everything put together for historically informed performance in the circumstances in which our music of a Baroque orchestra was conceived. Of course, the harpsichord is essential to this sound. Now, Caroline knows a lot about this because she plays Baroque violin. But what I love about her writing is that she also is a singer, and she understands how singers work and what excites them. The Listeners takes us on a kind of cosmic round trip, first from humanity contemplating the stars, looking at the sky, and then midway through looking at ourselves from the vantage point of the universe, the context of the universe, and then returning as it began to a kind of earthbound wonder. The oratorio begins with what is mankind's first musical expression, that is, singing. Singing without words, singing freely as we still may do in the shower. Except that this is much more beautiful singing. It is Avery Amereau singing a vocalese, which the choir picks up, humming without words, humming then in beautiful harmonies which burst into a single word, the Spanish word brillas, or you shine. And come to think of it, when we teach children about the stars, one of the first things we talk about is their twinkling. Up above the world so high, how I wonder what you are. And this opening movement, which recurs at the end, is one of just slack-jawed wonder and amazement. I have to tell you, in the first chorale rehearsal, when the music was brand new and unknown to anybody, as we explored these harmonies, as they kind of unfolded before us, you could sense a kind of exhilaration that went through the room. Exhilaration that's just born out of singing beautiful harmonies beyond the reach of words. After the prologue, the listeners gives us a Baroque view of the heavens, starting with the harpsichord and then twinkling away into violins answering one another in open fifths, those intervals that they tune to, and then erupting, as violinists love to do, by arpeggiating, playing rapidly oscillating figures across all four strings. This accumulative effect then sets the stage for a poem by Walt Whitman, sung by Dashon Burton. Whitman is quite enamored of contemplating the heavens, but midway through the poem, he asks an important question. Once we gain understanding and knowledge of the heavens, will we be satisfied then?
This day before dawn, I ascended a hill and looked at the I said to my spirit when we become the enfolders of those codes, and the pleasure and the knowledge of everything in them, shall we be filled and satisfied them?
I think it took our audience by surprise when Dashon got up and walked over to a 1970s turntable and turned on an LP, a vinyl version of that Voyager spacecraft golden record, in which the Secretary General of the United Nations and people from 55 different countries with 55 different languages greet the people of outer space. You will hear some of those languages, and then the choir softly singing a kind of reminiscence of Walt Whitman's previous words, "Let your soul stand cool and composed before a million universes."
Բոլոր անոնց, որ գտնվին եզերքի մի կամացություններեն անտին, ողջույններ։ 안녕하세요.
Witajcie istoty z zaświatu. 各位都好吧，我们都很想念你们，有空请到这儿来玩。
Hälsningar från en dataprogrammerare i den lilla universitetsstaden vi fångar på planeten jorden.
પૃથ્વી ઉપર વસનાર એક માનવ તરફથી બ્રહ્માંડના અન્ય અવકાશમાં વસનારાઓને હાર્દિક અભિનંદન. આ સંદેશો મળે વળતો સંદેશો મોકલાવશો.
Пересилаємо привіт із нашого світу, бажаємо щастя, здоров'я і многое літа.
درود بر ساکنین ماورای آسمان‌ها. بنی آدم اعضای یک پیکرند که در آفرینش یک گوهرند. چو عضوی به درد آورد روزگار، دگر عضوها را نماند برا.
Želimo vam sve najlepše sa naše planete.
It's very appropriate that a work that is written for a Baroque orchestra and chorale would include a poem from the Baroque period. And that is what we have in the poem by the Scottish poet William Drummond in the next piece. It begins very Baroque. In fact, Caroline writes Vivaldi-esque in the music. And we will hear a typical Baroqueified aria with lots of fioritura, a beautiful display of Avery Amereau's voice, and a very confident underpinning of repeated chords in that kind of bravado that we expect from the Baroque period.
At first entranced, with sad and curious eyes, Earth's pilgrims stare on those strange prodigies. The stargazer this round finds truly move in parts and whole, yet by no skill can prove. The firmament sings from mysteries, and everlasting never task. Secrets of magic and of that for gold, no time, no voice can share.
Later in this poem, however, Drummond's rapture of the stargazers changes to a kind of realization of what mankind has done on earth, the futility of war, and ultimately the choir intones that they who dream in world's vast frame must turn to dust. All of that confident Baroque bravado, all of those pulsing Vivaldi-esque chords turn into a kind of anxious rhythm that accompanies a very tortured and anxiety-filled vocal line. The next selection features that other period instrument of the 1970s, that is the tape cassette player, one of those little rectangular things with the push buttons. It contains a recently discovered lecture that Carl Sagan gave in 1994 at Cornell. And he's looking at the first photo of the Earth taken from outer space. Now, that isn't the one that we're familiar with, the Earthrise that is so beautiful and so recognizable, and you see it on posters all the time. Here, the Earth is nothing but a couple of pixels in an enormous galaxy where it could easily be lost. And with it, Sagan gives us a kind of selfie and turns with it the whole focus of this oratorio to how we are regarded, what we have done with the earth, and how we relate to the universe as a whole.
So there it is. The earth, it's a pale blue dot. That's us. That's home. That's where we are. On it, everybody you love, everybody you know, everybody you've ever heard of, lived out their days there. The aggregate of all our joy and suffering. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark, in our obscurity, in all this vastness. To me, this picture underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. Thank you.
Nothing in The Listeners speaks more to our current condition than the poem Maps by the Harlem poet Yesenia Montilla. It was written in 2017 when the issues of immigration were at the forefront of American and international politics, as they still are. But the issue of borders and maps now has been reviewed in terms of viruses and pandemics which know not city limits or county lines or international borders. And it reminds us of not only the totality of human life, but also our susceptibility to common things. The couple who sing here are clearly separated by a border and doubt that they will see one another again. but they do ask, what would a world be like without borders? They sing, I wish maps would be without borders and that we belong to no one and to everyone at once. What a world that would be.
I wish maps would be without borders, and that we belong to no one and everyone at once. What a world that would be. Or maybe we would call it something more intrinsic, like forgiving, or simplistic, like river or dirt. And if I were to see you tomorrow and everyone you came from had disappeared, I would weep with you and drown out any black lines that this earth owes to it. Because what is a man but a useless prison?
The next movement, of course, is my favorite as it features my friends in the Philharmonia Chorale, but also because it carries such an important message that speaks to us particularly in our time. It's written to a benediction called Blessing the Boats by Lucille Clifton, and Caroline herself calls it the Irish blessing. It's very comforting, saying that the tides of our understanding will carry us out beyond the face of fear. What a great phrase for these times, to be carried beyond the face of fear. Caroline is so sparing and careful with the text. Each phrase is delivered simply with the simplicity of a Bach chorale in the middle of a passion. The harmonies are memorable. The phrases of the text are separated and repeated, making sure that the audience follows every possible idea. It's clearly going to be a standout. I told her from the beginning, this is the piece that is going to be published and republished for every church and high school choir that knows good music when they see it. In contrast with the meditative quality of the preceding movement, Caroline writes Pulsar, which is the sole orchestral only movement. It's kind of an intergalactic hayride. We hear the sort of familiar sounds that we have heard in sci-fi movies played on 18th century instruments with various harmonies hurtling past, trumpets entering and leaving. We hear vigorous melodies and very, very exciting rhythms. And then you'll notice that we hear the same harmonies that we heard just seconds ago, set to those words again, beyond the face of fear, as we hurtle through space. The listener ends just as it began, with that beautiful vocalese followed by the choir's brillas. In other words, after all of our musings about the galaxy, we return just to the wonder of it all. You shine. I hope that you too will find new meaning in this work, so freshly composed a mere 6 months ago, and so freshly changed by the nature of our current times. I found it very reassuring. I find it exhilarating, as my choir did, and all of us at Philharmonia hope that you will stay healthy and that your spirits can be lifted by this cosmic music. Sparky and I hope you've enjoyed our commentary on the listeners and that you will get your recording, that new CD, from philharmonia.org.